If you were a kid in the 80s, these were the movies you weren't supposed to watch. Critics hated them. Parents definitely hated them. The covers alone were enough to get your attention. Raunchy teen comedies were basically their own industry.
Amazon Women on the Moon.
Amazon Women on the Moon is basically what happened when somebody tried to turn late-night channel surfing into a movie and somehow got away with it. The whole thing is basically a spiritual cousin to the Kentucky Fried Movie. It starts with a fake 1950s sci-fi film about astronauts landing on the moon and stumbling into a world of dangerous women, played with cheap sets, stiff acting, and deliberately lousy effects. Then the broadcast keeps cutting out. Suddenly the movie starts flipping through fake commercials, telethons, talk shows, and all the other weird junk that used to fill late-night TV. That's what makes it work. It's not just spoofing old sci-fi, it's spoofing the whole experience of mindlessly channel surfing after midnight. The cast is stacked too, which makes the whole thing even stranger. You keep getting those little double takes where somebody unexpectedly turns up in a fake commercial or some throwaway TV sketch. It's uneven, no question. That's just part of the deal with sketch movies like this. But what makes it stick is how perfectly it captures the version of television it's making fun of. Cheap late-night programming, fake ads, random channel surfing, and that weird mix of junk you used to land on after midnight. There really isn't another movie quite like it. Beneath the uneven sketch movie structure, it plays like this strange, overlooked gem built out of junk TV, midnight programming, and old channel surfing culture. It's funny, but it's also weirdly specific. A snapshot of a whole kind of television that's basically gone now, and something we're probably never getting back in that exact form. Most people remember Mischief for Kelly Preston. A painfully shy teenager suddenly finds his quiet life turned upside down when a confident new friend arrives and pushes him into situations he has no idea how to handle. Look past the teenage plot for a minute and you start noticing something different. The streets, the diner, the storefronts. None of it feels like a studio recreation. The actor playing the shy teenager had just turned 18 when filming started, spending the shoot driving period cars through a version of small-town Ohio that actually looks lived in. Many 80s nostalgia films rely on tidy backlot versions of the past. Mischief uses real streets, real buildings, and places that already look like people have lived there for years. The setting feels genuine, which helps the awkward teenage comedy land more naturally. Kelly Preston at the drive-in doesn't feel staged. It feels like someone's half-remembered teenage memory. The iconic bedroom scene became the moment a lot of teenage viewers remembered long after the movie ended. The movie only pulled in about $8 million in theaters, but the whole environment doesn't feel assembled. It feels found. And that's why people kept discovering it again on late-night cable. A disastrous theatrical return of just $331,000 usually guarantees a project gets buried forever. But Private Resort survives purely as a humiliating origin story for two future stars. TriStar Pictures backed this 1985 sex comedy, packing the 82 minutes with every cheap trope imaginable. Aerobics routines, shower gags, and guys falling straight into swimming pools at a swanky Florida hotel.
Here you go, honey. Let's go.
The paper-thin plot follows two hormone-driven teenagers hunting for women, only to accidentally cross paths with Hector Elizondo playing a heavily armed jewel thief. Before landing major television and film careers, a ridiculously young Johnny Depp and Rob Morrow took these roles simply to collect early paychecks. Once they realized exactly what kind of movie they had signed on to, both actors reportedly joked about tracking down and destroying every negative of the film, which leaves Private Resort sitting out there as a highly embarrassing, wonderfully immature little footnote in Hollywood history. This is one you've probably never heard of. Joysticks comes from a very specific moment in the early 80s, when arcades were everywhere and teen comedies were selling tickets. The story is simple. A small video game arcade is about to be shut down, and the regulars decide they're not letting that happen. Instead of building sets, the production filmed inside a real arcade, surrounded by flashing machines and kids trying to beat each other's high scores. It was made for about $300,000, using a mostly local cast and a tight schedule. The idea was straightforward. Teenagers loved arcades, and they loved raunchy comedies. Joysticks simply mashed those two things together and aimed directly at that audience. The result brought in close to $4 million, proving a small, very specific concept could still draw a crowd.
Hi.
Watching a young Tim Robbins trying to play a slick frat bro in the 1985 comedy Fraternity Vacation pretty much captures the weird casting choices of the mid-80s. New World Pictures sent 3 college guys to a real Palm Springs resort with a tiny budget and one simple idea: chase the same local girl. Everyone on screen acts like they're the smoothest guy in the room, but none of them actually know what they're doing. The whole 89-minute movie runs on ego and bad decisions. Pools, hotel bars, rented convertibles. Everything turns into a competition between kids trying way too hard to look impressive. The comedy comes from pure overconfidence, crashing into zero real skill. Nobody backs down. Nobody admits they're clueless. The film barely made $3 million in theaters, but teenagers eventually found it on VHS rentals. And this loud desert rivalry somehow ended up feeling like a strangely accurate snapshot of college desperation. Johnny B. Good runs with one simple idea and just keeps going with it. What if every college in America suddenly decided one high school quarterback was the most valuable kid in the country? Anthony Michael Hall plays the guy stuck in the middle. One minute he's just a teenager trying to figure out what to do after graduation. The next minute coaches are showing up at his house, boosters are making shady promises, and every school is trying to outbid the others. Cars, cash, parties, girls, whatever it takes to land the star recruit. The real joke is the adults. They act worse than the teenagers. The recruiters start looking less like football coaches and more like used car salesmen, all circling the same kid like he's a winning lottery ticket. Robert Downey Jr. shows up as the loud best friend who keeps pushing things further than they should go. Uma Thurman also pops up early in her career as the loyal girlfriend watching the whole circus unfold. The movie also crashed at the box office. It reportedly cost around $22 million to make, but only brought in about $17.5 million in US theaters after opening in March 1988. It's not the smartest movie from the 80s, but the idea still works. Watching grown men lose their minds over a teenage quarterback never stops being funny. Orion Pictures figured the absolute easiest way to print money in 1984 was throwing a couple of Animal House alumni into a freezing Oregon river for Up the Creek. The studio dumped $7 million into a blatant cash-in, pushing Tim Matheson and Stephen Furst into a brutal whitewater rafting race as complete slackers from a fake school. They go up against heavily funded Ivy League and military teams, and that massive skill gap drives the entire movie. The rich kids show up organized and fully equipped, while our guys spend the runtime arguing inside flipping rafts, desperately trying not to drown. Shooting practically on the actual Deschutes River forced the cast into dangerously cold water, giving a juvenile script some surprisingly real physical stakes. The studio's gamble barely worked, scraping together just $11 million at the domestic box office.
Bombed.
Still, watching a bunch of elite snobs get completely derailed by total incompetence was exactly the kind of thing 80s audiences loved in those cheap slob comedies.
Where's the river?
3 rich, divorced guys renting a big California beach house just to chase women half their age. That's Hardbodies. It doesn't take long for them to figure out money isn't enough, so they bring in a local surfer to teach them how to talk to women. The problem is, his advice is awful. Behind the scenes, the movie was just as scrappy. Columbia only put in around $2 million and originally saw it as cable material, maybe even something for the Playboy channel. But by 1984, raunchy comedies were easy money, so the studio gave it a theatrical release instead. The whole 86 minutes runs on bikinis, crude jokes, and pickup moves that go wrong almost every time. And somehow, that was enough. Hardbodies pulled in about $5 million. Not a big hit, but it was enough to show that midlife desperation, cheap laughs, and a beach full of bad decisions could still sell tickets.
The lens cap is on.
Eh?
The lens cap?
In the early 80s, you didn't need a complicated story. You just needed a crowded beach, cheap beer, and a camera rolling. That's the entire idea behind Spring Break. Two awkward guys from the Midwest end up sharing a rundown Florida motel room with two loud Brooklyn hustlers during the chaos of Fort Lauderdale spring break. The director had just come off a major horror hit with Friday the 13th, but this time, he went after something easier and a lot safer. Columbia put up about $4 million and sent the crew straight into the real spring break madness. That's what gives the movie its look. A lot of those beach scenes aren't carefully staged. They're real college crowds already there, already partying, with the cast moving right through the middle of it. The movie doesn't care much about depth. It just keeps moving. Beer, beaches, wet t-shirt contests, sleazy developers trying to shut the place down. Reviewers tore it apart for having no real substance. Point a camera at a packed spring break beach in the early 80s and tickets practically sold themselves. My Tutor is pure early 80s sex comedy energy, built around one dumb idea and fully committed to it. A rich kid tanks his French grades, so his parents will hire a beautiful tutor to come over and help him study. Matt Latanzi plays the kid like he's constantly in over his head, nervous, sweating through every conversation, completely outmatched by the situation he created. Karen Kay treats the whole situation like it's perfectly normal, which somehow makes it even funnier. Then, Crispin Glover shows up as the strange best friend and quietly steals every scene he wanders into.
Yes, do that.
The movie lives in big suburban houses, tennis courts, and long study sessions that never stay focused for very long. It also wasn't some forgotten flop. My Tutor pulled in about $22 million at the US box office in 1983. Huge money for a small independent comedy. Sometimes a completely ridiculous premise gives you exactly what you came for. When Porky's started printing money, the industry rushed to mass-produce cheap copies. Screwballs takes the absolute lowest road possible. A group of high school guys spend an entire year trying to pull off one R-rated scheme aimed at the most popular girl in school.
Used to do this exercise. It's lewd, obscene, and nasty.
Her nickname is literally Purity, which tells you exactly how subtle the movie plans to be. The whole thing was shot in Toronto with local actors, while pretending it's a typical American high school. It was simply cheaper to make it that way. The comedy leans straight into cartoon stupidity. Rival nerds get humiliated, while the main group builds increasingly ridiculous plans just to spy on classmates. Roger Ebert called the film little more than a string of dirty jokes. Audiences ignored him. The movie still pulled in around $2 to $3 million. Flipping the channel back to sports, the second your parents walked into the living room during a late-night TV broadcast was just part of watching movies like this. Short, cheap productions like these capture an era when distributors would greenlight almost anything with lockers, teenagers, and a crude punchline. One of the most blatant Porky's knockoffs that somehow worked anyway. That's the list. 10 raunchy 80s comedies that somehow made it through the studio system. If you like digging up forgotten movies like this, subscribe to VintageVerse for more.